Hey folks, welcome back to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. And today I'm joined with Paul Shields. Paul, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great, David. Thanks so much for having me.
So I was saying right before we started recording, this is really cool. We both have awesome microphones, right? And you said something about you use microphones. You used to play music or used to be a music producer?
Yeah, no, I was I played bass in a few like local bands, and we got some notoriety. So when the whole virtual switch happened in our world in 2020, I had some nice microphones and things kicking around from those days. So I was able to find some updated technology to make them relevant and get some good use out of stuff that was honestly collecting dust. So it's been great.
Oh, awesome. Well, hopefully the sound quality on this is going to be off the charts for both of us.
Well, we're setting a new standard now for your pod. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to ship a microphone to every guest. Actually,
that's
so
right.
It's gonna get quite expensive. Actually, we'll just take your microphone and we'll rent it out to everyone else. So, Paul, why don't you give an introduction to yourself and what are you doing, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So, as David said, my name is Paul, and I'm really working with emerging leaders, coaching them into leadership roles. So those subject matter experts who are really good at doing things and then get asked to teach other people to do things, or folks who have led teams on a smaller scale, like retail or restaurant managers who are moving into new areas of their business to support their companies. So I love working with new leaders and emerging leaders and folks who are just trying to find their voice in their new roles. That's, that feeling you get when you're cooking in somebody else's kitchen and you can't find the spatula. I'm the guy that helps you find it as quick as possible.
Yes. Yeah, I think you have a very interesting background. Actually, why don't you share a little more about that? Like earlier in your career, you're talking
Sure.
about how working in the retail sector and hospitality really shaped the type of leadership coach you are today. So I'd love for you to talk more about that.
Yeah, I started my retail journey as a stock clerk at a Zellers in the town I grew up in, or the city I grew up in, which puts a little date on it for those who don't remember. Zellers is back. Like a Canadian Target. Yeah, they're back now. I saw that.
They're back.
I got the opportunity to be a retail leader in a smaller company here in Canada that's niche for running, and as I started to I like to say I stumbled my way up the ladder and sort of fell into other positions. But what I really realized is retail leaders are smart. They're adaptable. They have to solve problems that are immediately in front of their face. There's no or very little putting it off in an email, right? When you got an angry customer in front of you. Mm-hmm. And so I spent, the better part of 20 years working in all levels of retail, but much of it spent at the manager level, at the area manager level. And then near the end of, not quite the end, but as I got towards, my larger roles in retail companies, I started on the training side and really found the joy in working with those leaders and helping them, make their days that much easier and solve those problems that much quicker.
So that's very fascinating. I want to dive into that because I spent a good chunk of my teenage years working in retail, food, in the kitchen. And my family, especially my dad, he's a blue collar worker, and he's like, "Now you know how hard it is, Dave." And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad," and I'm only doing this for a summer. I want to dive into that, but before we go there, I'm interested just to the present. Like, how do you feel? All those experiences working in retail, customer service. Yes, it's in your face. There is no hiding behind a monitor, a computer, an email, or even politics. You got to address the problem right on the spot. How has that shaped you as a leadership coach and facilitator today?
Yeah, two things I think it really gives me is it's a unique experience, and you have a sense of urgency that is just different. It's not that, other industries don't have urgency, but like you mentioned, when that person is right in front of you and, you're the manager of a fashion retailer, and that the person that you're dealing with is angry at you, the manager, because their product didn't arrive when it was supposed to, or they got the wrong size from a warehouse somewhere, or
It's
so,
your fault.
like they're right. It's my fault. Right? And as the manager, there's an ownership to that is really unique. You really, the problem or the solution doesn't land in finding out who came up with the problem or who to blame. The solution lies in how you solve it. So you have to own that, and so it creates a sense of urgency for in nearly everything I do that I think really serves me well, because I want to get things done. I want to be timely. I want to be available to my people, and then I have that sort of urgency always in my on my mind. The other thing I think it does is it gives you a great empathy for what people are dealing with, regardless of what industry they're working in. When you're talking about like workload, or you're talking about demand, or you're talking about development, like those are all, they're common struggles throughout all industries. But you see it in retail. You see these managers who went to school for some for marketing or for accounting, or they have these higher level skill sets, and there can sometimes be called like just a manager, right? Or, oh, it's a retail manager. So they may not have the eyes on them the way they might if they were applying out of university or applying out of college. But they love the industry, they love retail, and they want to work their way through it. So I have a tremendous amount of time and empathy for those frustrations. And I think that I can create some really great conversations around how to navigate that. But those are the two things that I feel like I use most often from my retail career. That and my connections for various items, shoes and things when I am running low.
When you're running low. Yeah, I reflect on those years working in retail, working in fast food, and working in a kitchen. It's one of the things you don't do. Like my first actual office job, quote unquote, was customer service. So, there's you build a office voice, a calm voice, a therapist voice right away. It's like, I understand.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. But one of the things I was just going to say, like, one of the things I found is that you could be thrown into a firefight, and like just a proverbial firefight in the middle of craziness in any situation now in the white collar environment. There's very little panic. It's actually, you thrive on that. Like, that's what I find. Like, you can throw me in the middle of like craziness. I'm just like, oh, this is juicy. I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And that retail environment, that crazy hospitality, you're just like, I want the fire in the kitchen, right? Like, I want this. Give it to me.
Yeah. There's something about that that's very it's like invigorating, it's energy driving. And not that you wanted chaos every day, but I think the uncertainty of what's going to walk in your door, like every great interaction, every problem, every opportunity walks in your door to talk to you in the retail environment. And, having worked in downtown cores, in the most populous city in this country, I've worked literally right at the heart of Yonge and Dundas Square. And there's not a whole lot that could happen in a day in my life now that is as crazy as the most common day there, simply because of the amount of people and the nature of being in the center of the city there. Like, some of the wildest things happen. And then, so, I often help use that to sort of center myself if I'm having a frustrating day, if things have changed 100 times, in my day, in my week. I often will remind myself, well, there could be crazier things happening a lot closer to you than, behind a screen or from an office or whatever. So it's a good centering tool to be like, it could be crazier right now.
It can always be crazier. So let's jump off that word crazy for a second. I asked you pre-podcast, crazy and true fact about yourself. And you said something about your friends would say that you're the most interesting man in the world. And I don't know what that means, but crazy or true fact about Paul Shields?
Yeah. Do you remember those beer commercials from a few years back with the most interesting man in the world?
Yeah.
Now, I believe this is hyperbole. I want to be very clear. I don't think I'm the most interesting man in the world, but my friends would often joke that because I've been so lucky to have the opportunity to do a lot of really fun things. And, growing up, I had parents who loved to travel and loved to take the family. So we got to go to some really fun places. I'm a Canadian kid. I grew up playing hockey, so I have that experience. I've done Ironman. I've played, concerts with bands like the Foo Fighters, and I've just done a lot of these really
You
unique
played with
things.
the
Now I'm a
Foo
coach. Now I
Fighters?
have my so I like to say it like that because it sounds really impressive. But there was a big festival, and we were on a very small stage with maybe 100 people milling about and basically talking through our entire set. And they were on the main stage to tens of thousands of people with everybody paying attention to them. But I can say that I was in the same space as the Foo Fighters. So yeah, so when I say that, I'm not that there's not one crazy fact about me. I'm just so lucky to have been able to try a lot of things, and I tend to be an extrovert by nature. So wherever the crew's going, that's part of where I want to go. Or if I really want to go somewhere, I'm taking everybody with me. So that's yeah. But I guess if we're gonna nail it down to one, I have over 100 hours of tattoo work done on me. So if I were wearing a suit and or tie, yep. You probably wouldn't be able to. So you'd see very, very, very little bit of it. But that's maybe that's a fun, wild fact. Is for 100 hours of my life, I've sat in a tattoo chair, making myself even more colorful.
That's what I find most amazing about that fact is that you actually calculate the number of hours.
You'd be surprised how much you get asked, because oftentimes when you have visible tattoos, you get asked about how many you have, and the truth is that, like, I have my right arm is a sleeve. It's really literally from wrist to shoulder. Does that count as one, or does that count of all the hours I sat there to get it to look like this? So one day I sat down. I did a very rough estimate, but that's my best guess as to where we're at.
Okay. Yeah. I have friends who have like tattoos as well, and they've I don't have it myself, but they've said it's like it's a form of artistic representation. It's an expression of some sort. Is it that for you, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the art of it. I like the aesthetic. I mean, you don't get covered in tattoos that people can see to not be noticed. So it's I there's some wonderful people in that world. Like, you meet a lot of self-made, entrepreneurs. Like, if they had started any other business, we'd talk about them as entrepreneurs and businessmen and business people doing these amazing things. So again, I guess there's a little bit of that retail empathy there, being like, man, this is a hard gig. And so I've been able to meet a ton of wonderful people in that world. And, when you spend enough time around the shop, you're like, yeah, I like the way that looks, or I like the way that looks. And all of a sudden you start to look like me.
Well, let's talk about that. So I want to start on the timeline, like how your early years shaped who you are right now, because I truly believe that, how you grew up, your unique experiences, your unique crucibles, if you want to call it that, shape the type of leader you are today, and how you show empathy. You talked about empathy. It contributes to how you show up today and how you coach others. So I'm curious, the early years of Paul Shields, what are some memorable events that you can think about that shaped who you are today?
Yeah, I remember my first. It's not my first retail job, but it was the first time I was directly interacting with the customers. Like I mentioned earlier, I worked for Zellers, but I was a stock guy. The only time I ever really talked to the customers was taking patio sets to cars that they wouldn't fit in. So when I started working for a niche running retailer in Canada, and when I started, my mom was teaching clinics, the running clinics, like Learn to Run, a marathon. I think she was teaching the marathon clinic at the time. And the manager was a really nice guy who said, hey, to the clinics, hey, if anybody has any kids who are looking for work, we're really shorthanded right now. This is a small store that was expected to do one number, and they completely blew that number out of the water. So I was looking for a gig as I was coming back from my first year of college, and my mom hooked me up. And I remember, like, I didn't, to say I had an interview would be really generous. It was very much like, oh, you're willing to work here, you're breathing, and you know what running is. Great, you're allowed. Like, we'll have you. But in that, they were long days. There was not a lot of us, and we were really busy. So you got to work. You were working with the customers, and you were learning on the fly. And it wasn't this, really polished, perfectly curated training journey of how to be a retail employee or how to deal with these customers who are mad at you for these various things. But so you were learning on the fly, and I was just having so much fun. And I would think about that often as I went through my retail career in those moments. But as I look back, it's those moments that I was the busiest that I also had the most fun. So the man's name was Roland. I'll never forget. Rolly was just a good-hearted man who really wanted us to do well, even though I don't know that he ever got any particularly formal training about being a leader or being a manager, but he had our backs always, and he really wanted us to succeed. He gave us a few examples of the wrong way, for sure, but more often than not, it was his heart and his belief that we could do this. Even though we were a small team, even though we were getting just felt like caved in every day, he was so kind to us, and so I often remember that from my early retail. And I as I went on to be a retail leader, I tried to emulate a little bit of that in the sense of, if people if I remember how it felt when I knew he believed in me, so I really tried to bring that to others, because that's from my early days. That's a big one. And then at the running room, I just kind of stumbled my way forward. When somebody, like, I was a part-time worker, and then when I left school, they needed a full-time person, so I was like, oh, I'm available for that. It was a new manager, a different system, and then they needed an assistant manager, and I was like, well, I've been here for a while, like, maybe I can do that. And as the roles became available, I just kind of continued to fail forward.
Fail forward. It's kind of, there's an irony there that you worked at the running room and you're falling forward and failing forward, right?
Yeah.
On the topic of failing forward, like, anything memorable there in your early years that sticks with you today?
Well, it was a little bit further into my run as a manager, but I was applying for a district manager's role. Now, to put this into context, I was maybe 21 or 22. I had no business applying to manage, adult leaders who were leading teams of other people, but I really believed that I belonged there. And my area manager, my boss at the time, he's a very direct individual, but he was so helpful and so such a wonderful leader and very clear, right? His expectations were clear and everything. So anyways, I apply for this role, and my boss's boss sort of calls me for this sort of phone screen, right? It's not really an interview. I can feel that I'm being blown off. And, at the time I really think like, hey, how come they're blowing me off? Like, what am I doing here? I've managed 2 stores at this point. I feel like I know what I'm talking about. But I wasn't really paying attention to sort of how you present yourself as a leader. So I was kind of frustrated with this. I was talking to my direct boss, a guy named Chris, who, the biggest feedback I got from the boss above was I had no profile. Like, who knows about you? And I thought that was so frustrating. I was like, what do you mean who knows about me? I work hard. I get good numbers. I've taken this store from here to here. And he said, yeah, but like, who knows about that? Like, what are you doing to sort of sell yourself? What are you doing to get people to notice the work that you're doing? You're one store of however many stores. And I remember being so annoyed with that at the time and not really understanding like what he was talking about, like profile, like all these things. And then I started to watch through that lens and see, there were opportunities on our national events team. Being with the events team put me in front of our owner, our retail directors, people that, were making these decisions or noticing these managers. So then I started being part of those teams. I started doing my thing in front of the people that needed to see it. And then all of a sudden I was being noticed as a manager. And, 2 years later, I was 23 and I was a district manager, which was crazy. I had no business being a district manager at that time, but I worked really hard. I tried really hard. But often throughout my career, I think about Chris and I think about moments like that phone call we had of me just being so upset and him just giving me this one little nugget of, hey, like, you need to do these things without telling me, hey, you need to do these things, right? So
Mhm.
that's one moment I can think of, or think of a lot.
Yeah, that's such a great story, and it's great that you learned it earlier in your leadership journey in your early 20s. I mean, I was nowhere close in my early 20s even to that, but even to this day, like working with leaders, emerging leaders, it surprises some folks who are trying to make that transition from an individual contributor, where I would even argue in that world you gotta build a profile of yourself, right? Because fundamentally you're working with human beings, and if I'm going to say, Paul, I'm going to entrust this business to you and the success of it, there it's based on trust. And who do I know? It's not just blindly, well, this guy's he just came out of the woodwork suddenly, right? So it's building your profile and building selling who you are. There's negative connotations with that, but you got to think of it as the other person needs to trust you. They
Mm-hmm.
need to trust you in order for them to hand the business to you to run. And that's fundamentally it. So you're doing good work. You got to make sure people know about it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
there is no trust.
Absolutely. And the value, like you bring value. And I think that if you come at it from the idea of I'm bringing value to these customers, to this business, to my organization, to whatever it might be, like that's when I think you can get rid of some of that negative. Like none of us want to be sold like that, like the stereotypical used car salesman,
Yeah.
right? And even as a coach, like nobody needs an hour's worth of my advice. Like you know a lot, and that's what I love about working with the clients I work with now. Like they're so smart and they know, and my job is really to ask great questions. But the idea of doing that is what value. So when you're selling yourself, if you're being valuable, if you're doing things in service of, then I think you can tear away some of that negative, right? I'm
Yeah.
not here to sell you something I'm not. I'm here to sell you something I am, and something that I know that I can provide value and I can support that business. And you don't have to worry. If you entrust me with this business or you entrust me with this role, I'm going to do a good job because here's why. Not because I'm faking it.
Yeah. Yeah. The authenticity, the being genuine around it. Human beings are smart enough to understand and feel that, right? So let's talk about now. You're a
Yeah.
coach, facilitator. What do you call it? Well-being performance.
Wellbeing's Performance is my company or my business,
Mm-hmm.
and it all sort of stemmed from at the end of my retail career. I was becoming more and more um, motivated by the learning and the development of those new leaders, and less motivated by opening and closing stores, by
Mm-hmm.
counting tills and hire and all the things you have to do as a retail leader. Um, and so as we went into March of 2020, my mom is in the learning and development space. And she said, all of our clients are moving to virtual. I've got to learn virtual real quick because I only have, a little bit of experience. And now we're going to be doing this nearly every day. And thanks to the role that I had previously, I was working with Adidas and I was working with the global training team. I was lucky enough to be doing training sessions on Zoom with our instructors who were in Germany and San Diego and all these places across the world. So very offhandedly, I said, "Oh, I know how to do that. I can help you with Zoom." And it sort of snowballed into me starting my own business to help people, either by being their person on the meeting. Are you sure it's plugged in? Have you turned it off and on again? That was me. You're going into your breakout rooms, your polls. That's what I was doing at sort of the start of the pandemic, in supporting my mom and other people in the learning and development space with their meetings, but also then working on what I want. I wanted to do my coaching certification. I wanted to do more facilitating and more, working with those emerging leaders. And so I just started getting my certifications. Ooh. Oh, there we go. He's back. um, so yeah, as I was so in that first year and a half, I was keeping the lights on by you know working as a technical producer on meetings, and then I was in the background working towards what I actually wanted to do. So I used that as my way into this space full time entirely, and now I've just been building on it over the last couple of years.
Okay, we're going to try that again. You hear me now?
I can.
Yeah, no, I say I want to commend you on that, making that transition, especially in 2020, where a lot of folks had to move online. So I guess when you look at that's like 3 years ago and where you are today, um, what are some of the things that you've seen that are interesting, like and from the perspective of situations that you've had to coach for and coach people on?
I think it goes back to what we said earlier is there's a human element of we are all doing our job. So yes, I've hired you to do this thing. And yeah, I'm your manager and I'm going to make sure that you're doing the thing that I asked you to do, but I'm not as acutely aware of everything that you're doing as you are, or your team is, or whatever. So that idea of how do I show what I'm doing? How do I sort of show my value? How do I, as simple as be myself and not do the role that I'm doing exactly the way the person before me did it? So that's one thing I've really noticed is no matter the industry, there's always that struggle to develop, to do more, right? Or that struggle to understand and highlight what I'm doing, like how I'm being valuable now. So how do I get to the next level? And when I'm at that level, how do I show folks, hey, I belong here and I'm doing a really good job, and I'm valuable, I'm a leader, whether by title or not. That's where I'm at. The other thing that I mentioned earlier, like people are so smart. It's so fun to talk with the clients that I talk to and the people that I talk to across all different industries now. It's, that's the one super fun thing about being a coach is I don't have to be an expert on the topic that my coachee is an expert on. I get to be an expert in really great conversations and asking really good questions and walking down a path that keeps our conversation on the rails. But I get to learn about so many cool things, and I get to learn about context that, I never would have had before doing this job. So that's really cool.
What's something that you can share there, like something that you've learned while coaching your leaders?
Well, I'm recently doing work with a mining company, and the schedule, the demand, the the safety that's involved in that, the checks and balances that go into folks working in active mines is fascinating. It's so interesting, and what I really noticed in talking to these clients is that they're like lifelong journeys for some of these folks. Like they've been 30 plus years in the mining industry, and their parents were part of it, or the town they grew up in, the mine is the source of income for much of the town. And that there's a whole other level of commitment that comes with that, and there's a whole other level of like passion and attachment to that industry that's really fun. It's neat to have those conversations with those folks and ask like, hey, what keeps you going, what keeps you motivated? Because excuse me, the answers are so different. And it's but what I've noticed is if you're in that industry, you're there for a long time, and there's a level of care there that is really admirable.
And so when you think about like across the industries that you've coached leaders on, like what are some common questions they have of themselves? You mentioned like, what value do I bring, right? But I guess actually, what questions should they be asking themselves? If you're a new leader, what are some questions they should be asking themselves?
I think you have to look back at the leaders that inspired you and defined the way that your journey to that path. I often encourage my coachees to beg, borrow, and steal all those characteristics, all the things that helped you, but make them your own. So how do I take what I learned from leader A, and how do I apply it to myself? How can I do that? there's a genuineness, there's an authenticity there. But I think that if you understand what motivates you and what's motivated you in the past, it can help create a roadmap to what's next. So like, what helps you buy in? What gives you focus, right? And so I think starting at the leaders that you admired most or that was most effective for you, kind of working your way through some of those questions as to what they did, what they said, how they made you do the work you needed to do. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, is we're trying to get the best out of our teams. I think it's important to think back on advice that you've got, things that really, caught your attention or really helped you. What advice do you think about often, and how can you shape that? How can you share that with your teams? I think there's lots of good questions you can ask, but those are a couple that I think are really great places to start. What leaders do you like? How do you tell your stories, and how do you give your advice and instruction when the time comes?
So when you look at some of the best leaders you've worked with over the years as a leadership coach and facilitator, what are some of the qualities and behaviors you've seen that they exhibit?
I think like trustworthiness, like the idea that you say what you do, you follow up on what you asked for. There's something about that really resonated with me. I think it resonates with everyone, but I remember the leaders that I remember most were the ones who, said what they were going to do and did it. Even if I didn't love the direction they were going, or we disagreed on how we were going to get there, the fact that they had a plan, they followed through, and would adapt or adjust as it went, there was a credibility to that I think is really important. I think that too, the leaders that I admire most were very authentic. They weren't putting on a show to be somebody different. They were themselves. They communicated in different styles, but the expectation was clear. It was coming from that person, right? And there was just no. I didn't feel like I was being swindled, or
Yep.
convinced. It was, hey, here's the situation. Here's what we got to do. Here's how we're going to get there, And I think last but not least, the best leaders I've had have included me in some way or another, or included others, right? This is the path we're going down. Here's what I foresee. What do you see? And it doesn't mean that my thoughts or my plan would have been any better. It was the idea that, hey, I'm willing to listen to you, and I'm willing to take into consideration your feedback and your thoughts, because you're, in the retail environment, you're on the ground floor. You're working straight with the customers. We've got this plan from head office that has to go in. What do you think? How are we going to make this work? Right. So there was a little bit of that collaboration that I think is really important.
Okay. And so when you think about all those, your observations, the qualities, the behaviors you've seen, now if you were to package it up right now and give advice to all the young leaders listening on this podcast right now, what advice would you give young or emerging leaders about to take the next step?
Yeah, first thing I would say is be yourself. Don't be authentic. Don't try to be exactly like the last leader that you had, because they did something you liked. Use those things, use those behaviors, and try and make them your own. But remember too that everybody learns, and you're not going to get it 100% right all the time. Being a really good leader doesn't mean you know everything. It means you're going to make the best decision that you can, and you're going to adapt if you need to. Yeah. So I think that, being yourself, being authentic to who you are, you did a lot of things right. Somebody believed in you and thought you were going to be a really good leader. So, don't use that as your entire leadership identity, but it's a good start. I think sometimes when I'm working with brand new leaders or those who want to take the next step, that imposter syndrome can sneak in. So, be yourself, and don't be afraid to learn, grow, make the best decision you can, and adapt if things don't go your way.
Imposter syndrome. We've talked a lot about that on this podcast, right? What are your thoughts on imposter syndrome?
Wow, I think that you can only be an imposter if you've sold something that you simply cannot do. So if what you say you've done or the position you've made it to is because of good work that you've done, good leadership skills that you have, however you got there for a reason. And unless that reason is truly, I faked my way here the entire time, which I would say is a tremendously small percentage, is you're sitting in that chair for a reason. You have this position for a reason, and you've done more good things than bad things to get to that spot. So don't try and give yourself a break. And so I think like it's really hard to actually be an imposter, unless you said you were a CEO and you're not a CEO and somehow you found yourself in that spot. Like I think it's hard to
You ever
get
watch
there.
Suits?
Yeah. But even that guy, he knew all that, right? He was just a liar. So, but he was an extremely good liar. It's tough. But I think that it's hard to be an imposter. And I think if you give yourself the time and the space to learn and reflect and, hey, you're going to miss the mark at times. That's okay. But if you keep working in the vein of trying to get better and trying to know more and trying to do more, then, you're not really an imposter.
Yeah. The irony there is that a lot of times leaders who feel that, if they were to advise someone else on imposter, feeling like an imposter, they would say exactly as you would say. It's like, hey, cut yourself some slack, right? You're going to make some mistakes, but you got here for a reason. But when it comes to themselves, I was talking to this person the other day. They're like, that person, they need to cut themselves some slack, blah, 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 blah. And then this person, they made a mistake on something like the same day. And they're like, oh my God, I was so stupid. And I actually I said to them, I go, hey, I'm going to take your words. Cut yourself some slack. It's okay.
Yeah, and that's why I love those perspective switching questions when you're working with a coaching client. Like, talk to me if somebody that worked for you made this mistake, how would you coach them? How would you support them in overcoming this mistake? And like you said, it's always using their same words, the words they just told us, about cutting themselves some slack. And
oh, we had some good giggles there for sure, right? They're like, yeah. Right. So a little bit of reflection on yourself then, Paul. Like a very interesting journey, and I can see how where you are now, it's been shaped by your early years. Talk about if you were to talk to the 20-year-old Paul again, what would you tell him?
I saw this. This is a really great question, and I've seen it other places, and I always kind of it's a reflection moment. It's something I always have to think about. But I think that the one thing I would tell 20-year-old me is not to be afraid of being a leader, not to be afraid of having a voice that for one reason or another people tended to listen to or gravitate towards. I think as a young person, I was a little concerned about that, and I didn't work the way that I might have liked in cultivating those skills until I was sort of, like I said earlier, kind of stumbled my way up, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, managing a store isn't just opening and closing the doors. It's not just, counting the tills and selling the sneakers. There's something here where now, you are the head of this table, right? You have to do more. And I think that I would tell myself at 20, there's something here. And if you embrace it now, like, you're going to love it. It's become my career, right? It's become the thing that I've enjoyed, every day. It's a thing that keeps me motivated is working with people and having these really great conversations and being valuable to folks, just supporting whatever their journey is. And I think that if I had embraced that a little bit sooner, I guess embraced by that, I mean, like, wanted to learn about things like discommunication styles. I wanted to learn things about behaviors of cohesive teams. And if I had taken a little more interest in that earlier, I think it might have helped me, and I might have not have made some of the mistakes that I made early on. I might have made them anyway, but I think part of the reason I made those mistakes was I was a little concerned about this whole leadership thing and where it put me and how, the almost the power and the responsibility of it, I think, was overwhelming. So I might just say, like, hey, take it easy. here's a couple books you can read. You'll feel a lot better about what you're doing after this.
Would you have read those books?
At that time, probably I would have read at least the first like 3 chapters before I got bored and started like playing music or going outside or something.
Playing with the Foo Fighters.
Yeah, doing something that was more urgent at the time. Definitely not more important.
Awesome. Well, Paul, I always leave the last question of the podcast to my guest to ask me. So, what question would you have for me?
So the question I would have for you is, we talked a little before about you starting this pod, but I'd love to know what you like to get. What is it that when you hop on your microphone, when you sit in front of a guest, what is it that you're hoping to take from each and every time you sit down and hear these stories and do this podcast?
Wow, thank you for asking that. It's I've been asked this question many times, and it's evolving a little bit every time, right? So when I started the why behind this, and it still is true, is it's a public forum for me to learn from someone, right? But when as I'm going through it, like for instance today, I never thought about how much my teenage years working in a kitchen and fast food, how much that actually has shaped me today, and especially like in the chaotic situations. So I actually learned something about myself today, right? So that's number one. Number two is just sometimes like answering the question like, hey, what's a few pieces of advice you would give to a new leader? I never actually sat down and codified all the things I've learned over the years and just, here's 2 or 3 things. I learned that from you today as well, right? So, to really just summarize like what I hope to get out of it, it's something for what I want to learn about leadership today, but it's what I'm finding is I'm learning more about myself as I'm doing this.
Yeah.
So how Steve Jobs once said in a 2005 speech he did at whatever university, he said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And more I talk to people, more I reflect, more I'm actually starting to connect the dots. I thought I had the dots connected, Paul. I think I'm just at the tip of the iceberg, connecting those dots, going backwards as to who I am today and how those experiences have shaped me. So it's a lot of introspection because of this podcast. So it's been very therapeutic in that way too for myself.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
That's what I'm learning.
Yeah, that's so cool. I think that one of the upsides or the silver linings of the last 3 years that we've all gone through together is that I think it's really highlighted the need for reflection. I think for so many of us, particularly in the industry we're in, it's go, go, go. You're busy, you're working, you got this going, you got these emails coming down. And I think, in the most dramatic way possible, we were all forced to take a moment and to reflect and to think. And I think that what we're seeing now as learning and development evolves, as coaching and leadership evolves, is how important that reflection time is and how much knowledge you have hiding, in the depths of your experience and your journey and your knowledge. It's amazing what you can, pull out of people. I was coaching with somebody this week and they straight up said like, well, I don't know anything. When I'm in this room of people, I don't know anything. And I asked him, well, there has to be something in the room that you have that nobody else has. And I said, I'm really going to push this question. So what is the thing you have in this room that nobody else has? And it took a while, and there was a lot of that, uncomfortable coaching silence that I'm sure you're very familiar with. Mm-hmm. But at the end of it, he came up with something. He's like, nobody in this room has managed as many people at once as I have. Nobody has had to deal with like literally hundreds of egos, hundreds of personalities, hundreds of characteristics. And I have done that, and nobody else in this room has. And all of a sudden, it was like this bang, and there was this powerful realization of him like, okay, I can, it was the first step to maybe I can do this. And I love that.
You can do this. So excellent. Well, Paul, any parting words for the audience out there?
Well, my parting words for you, David. Like, thank you so much for having me here. It's great that we were able to connect through a mutual pal, and I really enjoyed the process and being on here with you today. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, Paul, it was a pleasure. It was a fun podcast, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Sounds great.